I'm thinking of a sort of variegated leaf here. Again, to give a variety of different patterns. And this is something that maybe can be better illustrated with colour if it ever goes on to the painting phase. There we go. This area here is a little bit problematic to me. I think it's an area that just doesn't work. And so I tried some of these, falling tendrils. I think what we also need is maybe some of these more angular leaves. I've got a fern-like leaf. Fairly dark. And in a way they sort of echo the lashes here. But certainly it needs something here. It just doesn't seem to work. So now if I do that, these also look like a variegated leaf. Okay. Maybe one or two change in direction. Right there. Bending over. What I have learned though is that maybe I need to do some research into the actual plants, because my knowledge of them is sort of fairly limited. A sort of saddle has appeared here. For something to travel on the hummingbird with. How does saddle actually work with a hummingbird? How do you saddle one up? But I got this idea from an artist called Francesco Clementi. Whose work I quite like. Okay, so the beak is an essential part of the hummingbird. And to get the shading on it is quite tricky. It's getting the idea of sheen, while also maintaining the form of the beak. The feathers near here are very much like hairs. But then that's true of, most feathers are like this here. The quill and the feather outline or shape. And then these individual strands are very hair-like. Okay, I feel as if this composition is beginning to work in some places. There are some things on it that I feel could work. But actually, if the composition was beginning there, but then extended outward here to include the tip of the wing and whatever else is happening over here, like perhaps some kind of source for this. Feels like water here, so if there was a source for that water cascading down, that would make sense. I also felt that this branch here, if it was reflected, would become another eyeball shape, because that seems to be a recurring theme of viewing things. The wing here needs corrected because it takes a little bend here at the sort of elbow. At this point here, changes direction, and that corresponds with that part on the right wing. So yeah, there are sections of the work which seem to that on its own might actually work. I'd be interested to see if this here was even more organic and allowed to wander. How could that then be used as a compositional device? That'd be quite interesting. I'm noticing another leaf here. Perhaps you could do with a friend. I feel also to extend my repertoire, I should look at what other artists have done using similar themes, and so inevitably that would bring me towards Rousseau and how he constructs his imaginary jungles or his imaginary forests. There we go. And perhaps these have something a little bit like an allium extending upward and creating some other kind of visual dimension to the work. But of course, I haven't really thought that through. Because the whole purpose of this kind of activity is to figure out what's possible. And since we're in the realms of imagination, anything is possible. I'm sort of imagining this as a rainbow here. That might be quite useful. That's an idea. So I would like the works to be, plausible. And to do that, I feel I have to, while this is play, the rendering of the final work should be a little bit more realistic and incorporate, those realistic details as much as possible. Arguing that if I'm not convinced by the work, how will anybody else? How will anybody else be convinced by it? Case in point would be the, a bit like the paint palette here has got a wooden grain on it. There's a very, very fine grain on guitars. Very, very fine. So presumably, working this, this is quite large compared to the other ones that I've been experimenting with. These are 6 by 8 inches. Even with this being, considerably bigger, almost the size of 2, it's still small space to be working on. So to do such fine details is quite tricky. So. And there's also knowledge of the subject as well, because the soundboard here is symmetrical down the midline, and the grain is tighter towards this side and expands as you travel outward. So sometimes you can get 25 grain per inch here, lessening down to 16, 15 or so. Knowledge of the subject, I feel, helps encourage this idea of it being plausible and convincing. But I'm now asking myself if the viewer needs to know this. So I've just realised I don't know what the flower, a bird of paradise, actually looks like. So I'm just putting in growth lines there until I figure it out. I was tempted to shade this area, but there's a lot of eyes and pseudo eyes, like here, the thumb hole on the palette, this hole that has appeared for some reason in the bird of paradise flower, the eye as it's presented, the tadpoles in the water droplet. are pseudo eyes. It's even possible that these, if I do the guitar shape like this, with the fingerboard going up there, these leaf shapes eerily could become, a set of multiple eyes. Do we do them symmetrically or offset them? Like so. But as I said in the video that didn't record last night, these Elassomorphs are ideas that can lend themselves to multiple embodiments. So you can get similar ideas recurring, but in slightly different embodiments. So this time round, instead of what I think is a ginger plant, you have a series of eyes. Okay, we need the frets coming in. So I think that's why I enjoy doing these as much as I do, is because there's this kind of tension between the, it should be down there, the tension between the logical, the actual, and the something like that. And this, of course, could become any type of flower at all, tulip or other thing, any. Once the idea is established. So I didn't finish off my thought, as I was saying before, is that ideas that occur to you, you've got recurring ideas and motifs like the eye, well, are interchangeable. So once you develop an idea, you can extend it or combine them in different ways, and that's why I call these Elassomorphs, because their shapes are elastic and malleable and pliable, and lend themselves to reworking, as I've said already, in multiple embodiments. Like this fern idea here, and why can't these ferns then become, part of the next one? So if I do an eye with a Chess River coming through it, why can't the next one be ferns? But I quite like this as a shape. That's interesting. And now that I've stumbled upon the idea that the carcass of the guitar can be a habitat for living things, then you could play around with, different kinds of living things, which could be nesting or using this as their habitat. So, yeah, I'm a lot happier now that this is here. That seems to stop the eye from drifting off the page a little bit. I did consider another guitar motif here. It's just a semi on a waterfall, so the waterfall would cascade down from the shape, so, and the river would flow from here, cascading down. as a waterfall. You could have multiple drops. Let's say it goes that way. You could come in behind and then exit the front of another. Closer. So the river itself becomes a kind of connective element, which helps link together the different elements of the design. So I'm at the stage now of thinking, well, maybe I should be using Tipex from now on to correct the images, neaten them up, tidy them up for the next stage, which would be, presumably to transfer this onto another board, like so. And yeah, do I have space? I'll do that. To extend out for the bird, to complete the wing in, and maybe have that cascading motif. The flag has become lost, so and the Costa Rican flag is, as you can see in this one here, dark blue, white, and this red. This is French ultramarine blue, and this here is a mix of roughly half and half alizarin crimson and cadmium red medium, I think. And of course it's lost here, and it's lost because of the palette. So if I remove the palette, the mixing palette, and give it a place here, again I was thinking of something, this is just subsequent to last night's drawing live stream. I went away and thought about it. So we have the pool idea, and part of the palette could come up and disappear into the water, and also be like a sort of fin element. This would be quite amusing, quite interesting. Okay. But I was also thinking of a mannequin, because the mannequin idea has been presenting itself to me. And another artist that I like who uses mannequins quite a lot is Giorgio De Chirico. Do have a look at his work. His mannequins are interesting and often contain the same kind of holes in them. It's a mixture of mannequin and, Greek or Roman sculpture or rune. So a mannequin here might actually work too. But then the message of that is threat, isn't it? Because we think of a shark fin as threat, whereas a lot of the mood of this is kind of playful. Where's the threat? Is it the threat to the ecosystem or the possibility of life? So within this, imagined utopia, because, that's what it seems to be, creating this, your own vision of the ideal would be a utopia, then there's always a threat to that ideal situation. So Yeah, it is a bit like creating your own Garden of Eden, but within the Garden of Eden, there is a there is a latent threat, the possibility of things going wrong. So I may stop narrating for a while I have a little think. These appear like stepping stones within this area that should be water. And to anybody who plays the guitar, you might recognise the A minor or the E major layout, which was purely accidental, but having had some time to think about it, that's what it appears to be, and links up again with the idea that the guitar is therapy, the guitar music is therapy. Actually, I quite like that now. So, some Tipex for correcting. There. That makes it slightly easier to imagine. Without the interruption of the trial ideas. So not perfect, but it allows us a little chance to overlook the more obvious of the distractions. Just enough to dampen that down, make it less obtrusive. So the hummingbird became a messenger carrying things. So I'm not entirely sure what's a messenger of, but it's for the very first time in these Elassomorphs. It's actually carrying something. And like I say, has been saddled up for some sort of passenger. That's better. This highlight here on the eyeball has the appearance of the moon in my imagination. I'm not sure why that would be significant. But a lot of animal activity is linked to the phases of the moon activity. For instance, turtles and egg laying, which I've been lucky enough to see in Mexico. There's some errors there, but it's just annoying me. It shouldn't actually be there. When I live streamed yesterday, the unsuccessful live stream which didn't convert onto YouTube, I was speaking about how there is a tension between the idea of logic, which is embodied in the chessboard, versus the logical mind versus the imaginative and creative mind. And yes, artists can be inspired, but there was a time when art was a craft or a skill that was passed on and taught. For instance, Velasquez was expected to create artworks, and so yes, I know that I'm going to set about to make a portrait of a royal family, and it's going to have these conscious decisions, and then you're going to work what my tutor used to call the dignity of hard work. So if you just, it's a craft that you keep at it, you get better at it, more fluent at it. Versus the unconscious, more subconscious aspects of art. I'm struggling to express it, but it's the difference between conscious decision and unconscious or the subconscious mind coming up. So part of what I enjoy in these works is the conflict between reason and rationality and the inspiration of creativity. It seems to me these are just begging to have ripples around them. And then there could be a good interplay of interference lines. This part of the checkerboard is useful as reinstating it there, I think, has helped to redefine the boundary of the pond. And similarly here, but then we have the problem of a dark pebble or a dark stone, stepping stone, on an equally dark checkerboard. So sometimes I get around that by leaving a little halo. Untouched. But since I have Tipex today, I suppose I can suggest a highlight on it. Go. And that just nicely points up to potentially where this little waterfall motif could be installed there. So if we lose a little bit, we could point up here. And be partially occluded by these fern forms coming in. And that could actually be quite nice. I quite like that one. I'm now wondering if the hummingbird is a messenger and bringing some kind of gift or some kind of message. What message would be contained in it? That could become a motif for the image. In the meantime, we have these feathers to include. These ones are more hair-like, more obviously hair-like, but then they still have this kind of repeated scalloped pattern. That piece of the checkered pattern helps identify the branch. I just feel it's a little bit of a pity that this white against here. So until it's potentially worked up in paint, then the difference between this and this is hard to separate out without colour to assist. Okay, I think that's it for today. I'm hoping that this has made it to become usable on YouTube, so we'll just have to wait and see. If you are watching this, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you or hear from you in the next one. And if it does make it onto YouTube, please feel free to comment or ask questions. Thanks again.